we've been through the worst cost of living crisis in memory in the last 2 years, soaring energy bills, and that's because of our dependence on fossil fuels, right? Now, let's look at what the UK is doing internationally and what it's doing domestically. Internationally, it's saying we want to be the big persuaders for fossil fuel phase out, as it's known. And there's this argument about phase out, phase down, but we've got to get off fossil fuels. Home, they are saying, no, we've got to get every last drop of North Sea oil and gas, although they admit it won't take a penny off bills. Now, in that one example, you see the contradiction in our position. People would have to be completely stupid not to notice that that's the case. There will be some slow progress, I would probably characterize it as. There's been some important commitments to developing countries. There's a big fight and argument going on about fossil fuels and what the final statement says about fossil fuels. The significance of us being here, Aisha, for us, is a clear statement of intent, because I think the truth is the world is lacking leadership on these issues. And Britain has been a world leader in the past, but frankly, Rishi Sunak has rather trashed our reputation, particularly in the last few months. And we are determined to be back as a leader, starting with the power of our example. So doing the right thing at home, which is not just good for climate action, but good for bills and jobs and security. And that will then also give us the moral authority and the ability to persuade others abroad and be persuaders for the kind of action we need.
Ed, Rishi Sunak says that world leaders and people are not stopping him and bringing up these U-turns on net zero. He says everyone thinks the UK is actually doing brilliantly on renewables and leading the way.
He was here for about 5 minutes, Aisha, so probably didn't have much of a chance to see anyone. Look, the truth is rather different, which is what he did in September. This was different from what Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and David Cameron had done, was sent a big fat message saying, we are rolling back on net zero. And that has been heard around the world. At meeting after meeting, people say, yeah, we really do need British leadership. And in a way, what's interesting about what Sunak is doing is he's using as a shield the fact that we've done well in the past to say, well, we can now sit back and let everyone else take the strain, as he would see it. But by saying that, he reveals something. He sees this only as an obligation to be managed, not an opportunity to be seized. Now, we see this as an opportunity to be seized. If we want lower bills, if we want good jobs, if we want energy security, we've got to go further and faster on climate action, like our plan to have all our electricity provided from zero carbon sources by 2030, an example of the kind of world leadership Britain would bring.
I mean, he argues that he's unveiled, 1.6 billion for green finance projects. He says this delivers on the UK's commitment to spend almost 12 billion over 5 years and takes it further with new funding.
It's all funny money. Look, the truth is about this, Aisha, is let me just give you one very simple example. The world, as I said at the outset, is having a discussion about what to do about fossil fuels, because we know that it's the burning of oil and gas, fossil fuels, that is the source of the climate problem, but it's also the source in Britain of our energy security cost of living problem. So we've been through the worst cost of living crisis in memory in the last 2 years, soaring energy bills, and that's because of our dependence on fossil fuels, right? Now, let's look at what the UK is doing internationally and what it's doing domestically. Internationally, it's saying we want to be the big persuaders for fossil fuel phase out, as it's known. And there's this argument about phase out, phase down, but we've got to get off fossil fuels. Home, they are saying, no, we've got to get every last drop of North Sea oil and gas, although they admit it won't take a penny off bills. Now, in that one example, you see the contradiction in our position. People would have to be completely stupid not to notice that that's the case. And indeed, people are very smart and see that contradiction. They say, well, hang on a minute. You're telling us, if we're a developing or a developed country, that we've got to get out of fossil fuels, but you're saying the opposite at home. How does that add up? And that's the problem. That's why Britain's reputation is being trashed, because we're saying, do as we say, not as we do.
Okay. I mean, when you look at Labour politics, there was a bit of confusion over Labour's policy on oil and gas licenses. What Labour has now said is that there will be no new oil and gas licenses. But you've also got some people within the Labour movement, for example, Gary Smith, who's the General Secretary of the GMB, which is a very important part of the trade union movement. You know, he makes the point that, yes, you do have to invest in renewables, but we are still going to be reliant on fossil fuels for a while. Recently, this week, I think he put a statement out saying, you know, anybody who thinks that we're not going to be using gas it is just crazy. We are going to need gas for quite a long time. We can't all have heat pumps. So that, you know, there is a mixed view even on the Labour side of things.
Well, look, obviously, Gary and I work together on a lot of issues collaboratively. Let me just explain the position to answer that. So we've said that existing oil and gas fields will continue to be used for their lifespan. So that's ones that are already open and licensed. We're going to carry on with those. But the question for the future, Aisha, is do we have new oil and gas licenses? Now, why is that a bad idea, new oil and gas licenses? Well, on the one hand, it doesn't take a penny off bills because gas and oil are sold on the international market. Next, it requires huge taxpayer subsidy. So the government's carved a great big loophole in the windfall tax to persuade the companies to invest in these new fields. And third, it sends a signal to the companies, look, we're not really driving towards renewables, we're driving for every last drop of oil and gas. So that's on the one hand, it doesn't do anything for energy security or bills. And on the other hand, every major scientific body that has looked at this says it drives a coach and horses to any chance of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. But if we keep burning all of those fossil fuels, we blow way past 1.5 degrees. And this goes to the point about us now trying to persuade others to move off fossil fuels while doing the opposite at home. It's got to be a managed transition, and Gary's absolutely right about that.
Okay, let's move away from, I suppose, party political politics in the UK and step out, because the big challenge that this COP is going to face, and I interviewed a number of kind of eminent guests yesterday, is that what their concern is, on the one hand, you have these positive announcements about, as you say, the loss and damage fund, which is, you know, something which was a real sticking point in the past, this commitment to tripling renewables. There is a concern that those good PR announcements are slightly masking a slightly more sinister element of this gathering. And just in the last hour, the president of COP28, Sultan Al Jaber, who is a big oil boss, has said that he's claimed there's no science indicating that a phase out of fossil fuels is needed to restrict global heating to 1.5. So, you know, you've got the big boss of COP who's basically sort of rubbishing the science and saying it's fine, we can still carry on with fossil fuels.
I disagree with Sultan. I know Sultan well. He was the head of the renewable energy company for the UAE when I was the Secretary of State for climate change, but he's not right on this. All of the science says the opposite to what he says. It says we do need fossil fuel phase out. Sultan is the chair, the president of the COP. So look, he has got to be the person that brings people together. I think he knows, because I know from my discussions with him, that we do need strong commitments on fossil fuels at this COP. I believe it's a test of the world, but it's also a test of the hosts, frankly. As a big oil and gas nation, they have a particular responsibility to take a forward position on this. So I've seen Sultan's remarks. I don't agree with them, and I hope it's not the outcome that we see at the COP.
But look, lots of my listeners will absolutely agree with you, Ed. There'll be a lot of people dismayed with what Sultan has said. But he's very powerful, and these oil producing companies are really, really powerful. And for them, it's in their interest. They are going to try and extract every last drop out of this very precious. So how does the world move on when some people, they'll do some of the good stuff. They will throw some money at renewables. They're happy to throw some money at electric cars and things like that. But ultimately, they want to keep pumping and selling their oil.
Well, that is a characteristically important point, if I'm allowed to compliment my interviewer. But you did used to work for me. But look, you're totally right, Aisha. And that is why there needs to be leadership. You see, this is the point. This is the fundamental nub of this. We are I sometimes compare these COPs to 200-dimensional chess, if that's possible. And you know what a nerd I am and a sort of potential chess player. This is an incredibly complicated process. Therefore, what a really respected country like Britain does really matters. That's why people say to me, lots of people say to me, we really need Labour back in government. We really need people taking climate action seriously. Because if Britain is saying, oh, well, look, we're not so sure about this fossil fuel thing, we're backing off it, we're not going to get the outcome. So it's really hard.
Ed, listen, look, just to be totally honest, right?
Yeah,
even if there's a change of government and you're the climate change secretary, Sultan, even our allies in America, special relationship, just because you're the climate secretary or Keir Starmer's the prime minister and you go, listen, down with all this fossil fuels, stop burning all this oil and gas. They're not going to say, oh, do you know what? There's been a change of government in Britain. Yes, we're all going to stop doing this. It's very hard, isn't it, to move this forward when the big players, and we often just try and say it's China and India and the Arab countries. It is America as well.
It's incredibly hard. It's incredibly hard. But the fact that it's incredibly hard doesn't mean you don't try and you don't believe that a country like Britain can have an effect. I think we can have an effect. When we passed the Climate Change Act in 2008, when I was the Secretary of State, that was the world-leading Climate Change Act that put into law a reduction in our emissions. No country had done that before. And then we did it and other countries followed. Now, you are totally right, Aisha. This is unbelievably hard. We're trying to change our economy in the way we've run it for 250 years to something different. We're trying to persuade developing countries to do it. But here's the thing, and sometimes people despair about these issues. We shouldn't despair, because if we look at where we were in 2008, the world was heading for 5 or 6 degrees. Now the world's heading for 2.83 degrees. It's still disastrous, 2.8 or 3, but it isn't 5 or 6 degrees. That shows we have made progress. The world is moving. Now, the point of political leadership, and you've got to do whatever you can, is to move others. And there are developing countries that are in this position. We met President Lula yesterday. President Lula, an incredibly admired global figure. Keir and I met President Lula along with David Lammy. He came into office after President Bolsonaro, and said, I'm going to stop this deforestation of the Amazon, and we're going to get to zero deforestation by 2030. So it's not just Britain that says, look, we've got to act on this. Even a country like China isn't doing enough, but it is acting. So your listeners shouldn't give up hope, Aisha.
Okay. One very quick question before I let you go, just to clarify, because there's been a bit of confusion about Labour's flagship plan for the green economy, this £28 billion. Can you guarantee to my listeners that Labour is going to be spending £28 billion a year on the green economy?
Absolutely, that's what we've said. Absolutely. Look, what we've said is that we will ramp up to £28 billion a year while we meet our fiscal rules. Why? The key big question is why.
And when? And when, Ed? Not
in the second half of the Parliament. We said very clearly, look, the position has not changed, Aisha, from when Rachel Reeves set out in June. She said that the fiscal position is worse than previously, and we've got to take time to ramp up this investment to make sure it's value for money, and we will reach £28 billion a year in the second half.
So that's not going to get watered down. That's not going to get watered down.
No, absolutely. And let me tell you why it's important, Aisha, because this is the key thing. What is that investment about? It's about stimulating private sector investment so we can get the jobs in our country, because we've missed out on these really important clean energy jobs. It is about getting energy independence and lowering bills, which is crucial for families.
Okay.
And it is about investing in our transport system and a whole other range of areas, which can also be good for jobs and people's quality of life as well. And crucially, economic growth.
Okay. Well, look, Ed, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I will let you get back to all your moving and shaking in Dubai. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.